do I just say hello?
Yeah, just say your
My
name.
name is Deso Jagdish Kaur Dusanj Hood. And I was born at Vancouver General Hospital January 13th, 1945. And I'm going to today talk about the immigration of my parents to Canada.
My name's Ranjit. I'm born after 7 brothers, and 2 are my stepbrothers, and I was born in Vancouver General Hospital. And my name's Ranjit Kaur Desanj Day, and my birth date is December 3rd, 1942, and I was born in Vancouver General Hospital, and we're going to talk about our parents, Shyam Singh and Basant Kaur.
Thank you so much for taking out the time and joining us for this interview. So can you please share your family's immigration story?
Okay, I'm going to start with Shyam Singh, my father's birth date is recorded as 1883, and he was born in the village of Boadra, Post Office Bilga, District Jalandhar, in Punjab, India. And my grandfather's name was Naran Singh. I was told by my father, Shyam Singh, when he was a young boy, he had gone to visit a cousin in another village. And at this time, there was an outbreak of a deadly plague in which his mother and a sister and a brother died. He was then left as an only child. Around 18 years old, he left the village with a friend and joined the British troops who were engaged in a war with Burma. After their service, they returned home to their village. My father told me that he decided to leave the village because he saw no future with being a farmer and that there was so much poverty all around. He had heard about others leaving and going to Canada. However, he could only get passage to the United States of America. Shyam Singh arrived in San Francisco on the Empress of Japan on May the 30th, 1906. He had $60 in his pocket, and upon his arrival, he started work picking fruit. After several months of working, he heard that there was a group of Sikhs living and working in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. So with a friend, Brahm Singh, and another person, they made their way up north. My father told me it was a long journey, and upon arriving at the border, they had sheets of metal tin laying across the road to hear of anyone crossing without checking in at the border. They were taken into the border office, and one of the fellows accompanying my father had a pistol. I was told that this person pulled out his pistol, but my father quickly apprehended the gun, and with that action, the officer let my father and Brahm Singh cross the border into Canada. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of what happened to the fellow. Upon arriving into Canada, they made their way to New Westminster, BC, where there was a sawmill that went by the name of Fraser Mills. They were hired to work at the sawmill, but as the fall weather neared, it became very cold, and he decided that he'd like to return to San Francisco. However, at the border, they would not let them cross, saying that they were British subjects, and now he had to stay in Canada. He went back to work at the sawmill and started saving his money. He returned home by sea on a freighter to India every 5 years to visit his father and family. Then on September the 18th, 1933, my father came back to Canada with his bride, Basant Kaur, from the village of Daya, and their infant son, John Harbhajan Singh. He proceeded to work at Fraser Mills, which was located in New Westminster, British Columbia, but lived on Fraser Street, sharing a small house with another family. His main goal was to save money and start his own business. He was able to purchase a truck in 1941, and now he had established himself as a businessman with customers who purchased wood for their stoves. He now worked at a sawmill in Vancouver called Robinson Hackett in the evening, and during the day selling his wood and establishing customers. At the start of the Second World War, the Canadian government interned all Japanese people from the Lower Mainland to other parts of British Columbia. The majority of the Japanese people were fishermen. Therefore, many of their homes were close to the water in the Kitsilano area. After internment, the Canadian government sold these homes for low value, enabling many Eastern immigrants, including my father, to purchase their first homes, which were located between Broad Street and the existing Granville Street Bridge. With his business enterprising knowledge, he decided to start purchasing property, as he had a growing family. He now had 4 sons, so he was concerned about the future. The family lived in Kitsilano and attended the original Sikh temple located on West 2nd Avenue. Many families came together to share stories and fellowship with one another. Attending the Sikh temple was an important part of everyday life. As a family, we enjoyed many of the attractions in Vancouver, such as going to Stanley Park, Kitsilano Beach, where many children learned to swim, and the biggest attraction, which was Showboat. They were very fun-filled days. In early spring, we were taken by my family to Victoria for the Vaisakhi celebration and attended functions at Hillcrest, the Gurdwara, and Lake Cowichan. Every summer, the family also went to the Pacific National Exhibition. Life was busy, and Sham Singh purchased properties all through his working life. Some examples: 2 houses on 2nd Avenue with a lot, an apartment complex, 2 houses on 4th Avenue, which were later expropriated for the Granville Street Bridge to accommodate the off-ramp to 4th Avenue. He also purchased property along the Fraser River on Lulu Island, now known as Richmond, BC. In 1948, Sham Singh purchased a dairy farm in Dudney, BC, approximately 450 acres, one of the largest farms in the Fraser Valley. The farm consisted of Holstein milking cows, all manner of equipment for the growing of oats, grass cutting, and preparing the soil for the planting of one of the main crops, being corn, which was later sold to a farm market in Vancouver's Chinatown. The original owners of the farm were the Gardam family, whose son, Gardy Gardam, would go on to be the Governor General of British Columbia. At this time, Sham Singh and his family became very involved with the Abbotsford Gurdwara financially and supported all events and special occasions. A big part of Sham Singh and his wife's life was sending monies home to relatives because they knew of hardships and the difficult life many relatives endured because of poverty. They also sponsored many relatives to Canada. They always felt that Canada was a land of opportunity as long as you were willing to work hard. There are many family members, the Gales, Dollywall, Tour, Jawanda, that my parents housed, clothed, and financially helped, giving them a new start upon arriving in Canada. Many families, when they were immigrating from the Punjab, did not use a surname. The men were known by Singh and the women used Kaur. Therefore, it was the early 50s that children at school were being asked for a surname. My brother, who was at the University of British Columbia, chose the spelling of our surname Dusanj, spelled D-U-S-A-N-J. The farm was sold in 1959 and the family moved back to Kitsilano. The youngest of the children, 3 girls, Ranjit, Deso, and Surjit, attended high school in Vancouver and graduated. By 1963, the demographics of the landscape was changing. The East Indian population had grown substantially, and many families were moving to the east side of the city, where housing was less expensive, and therefore the decision was made by the Gurdwara Committee to purchase the land at Ross Street and Marine Drive. At the time, Sham Singh, along with a small group of Gurdwara attendees, pooled their money and with the sale of the existing temple, purchased the land in 1963 and selected Arthur Erickson and Associates to design the building. Sham Singh went to the property every day to stand and pray. Unfortunately, he did not see the building completed as he passed away June 24th, 1968. So I've listed Sham Singh and Basant Kaur's children. They had 6 boys and 3 girls. I'll use their Punjabi names and I'll give you the name that they went by. Gurbachan Singh Dusanj was the eldest, and we called him Gus. John Harbhajan Singh Dusanj was John. Surjit Singh Dusanj we would call Sidi. Karnal Singh Dusanj we called Gali. Jagdish Singh Dusanj was Jigs. Kuldeep Singh Dusanj we called Kippy. Ranjit Kaur Dusanj Day, we always called her BB because she came after all the boys. Deso Jagdish Kaur Dusanj Hood, I've always been named as Deso, but my proper name is Jagdish. And Surjit Kaur Martin. Dusange Martin. We always called her Keiki. My name is Deso, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of a rundown about my life. This is just kind of like, got to just start verbatim. As a kid, I was born on 4th Avenue in Vancouver, and went to Henry Hudson School. But when I was in kindergarten, by then my father had decided that we were to move to the farm in the Fraser Valley, Dudney, BC. So then I went there, and life on the farm was very busy. We all were made to do chores, and we had a big operation there. So we helped with hoeing in the corn, just all things that kids do with their parents. And a big part of our life was also attending the Gurdwara, going when we could to Abbotsford. And it was a journey, so we always spent the night at the Gurdwara. And so in school, you know, just like all kids, you have the summer holidays and you're busy, but we were always taken from when we were on the farm. We would go up to Harrison Hot Springs, and then the other big thing was to come to Vancouver for the Pacific National Exhibition. But my father also kept a couple of homes still, even though people had all left the area. And so we would go to Vancouver, and it would be very exciting because then we'd be able to go to Stanley Park and go to Kitts Beach and do the other things that other kids did. And so then I progressed till grade 8, and then my dad decided that we were going to sell the farm because the boys were now, they were wanting to do other things with their lives. So the big operation was sold, and we came back to the city, and we just started going to school. And one very important aspect of our lives was where to go to school, because there were a lot of East Indian families had this attitude. Once the girls were about grade 8, they would keep them at home. It was like, that's enough education. My father did not think in those terms, so we went on. Like I went to Kitsilano High School, and I was very involved with the school, all activities, but they encouraged us, all sports, basketball, volleyball, and I was a very athletic type of person. So I was always on the teams, and then the big thing was the waltz team. And and I took, you know, courses that if you want to go on for higher education. So I graduated from Kitts, and then I decided, I was going to maybe go to UBC. So I took, I started with maths and science. And so, you know, and then I met a fellow and I got married. So things kind of went sideline. And I was probably one of the first that married out of the race. I married an English fellow, and people always want to know if it was difficult. My father, by then my 2 brothers were already married to English girls, so it wasn't a big transition. But I do think that, you know, being a girl in an Indian family, they always think that, you know, you're going to get married and we're going to do this, but it just didn't happen that way. I've been married now for 53 years, so I think probably it was successful. We have 3 children, a girl, the oldest, and 2 boys. And so with my life, it was basically, my husband was in the building business, so we were, you know, as a young couple, you do that, but it was still important going to the Gurdwara and taking my children to expose them to the 2 cultures, English and the Punjabi way of life. And so life has been good. I'm still very active athletically. I swim, I skate, and the swimming comes from when at Kitts Beach, and I exercise, and I try and keep a healthy lifestyle and a good outlook on life. And I think it's really important to, I'm really glad for today to talk about my parents, because if it wasn't for my father's hard work and what he did, it really is awesome, because not only was he raising us 9 children, he was sending, I can remember at 14, it was my job, I went to the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, and they would send a bank draft to India in the spring and in sort of in the fall. And I remember saying to my mother, why is it that we always have to come to the bank and send money? And she'd say, but, you know, Garibi. And, you know, and so I really learned at a young age. I drove my parents to the Gurdwara. It was just like they talk about Chinese kids doing stuff like that, but really I did that, and I'm so glad that I was there for my parents and to show that, you know, I really cared, and I really thanked them for what they did sacrifice for us. And so, back then it was buying property and so selling, and he just, even though his English was not like fluent, he did very well, and I'm very proud.
Well, thank you so much for taking up the time and sharing your own as well as your family's story with us.
Okay, I'm just going to talk about a couple of experiences maybe I had as a child. One of the ones was being that I'm Sikh. And that was very important. I was Sikh, and we went to the Gurdwara, and there was a kid at school that called me a Hindu. And so, of course, I might have been about grade 4, about 10, and so I punched the kid. And when I came home, I said to my mother, this kid was calling me a Hindu. And I said I didn't like that, and she was very upset. She said, "Oh no, we're the same. You're not to be like that aggressive." And I was very puzzled, wondering, well, I thought Hindus were different than we were. And now that that I'm older, I see that we have the Vaisakhi, or we have the Dhaliwal, and we join with it's a Hindus festival, but we join with them and enjoy all that sort of stuff. And the other aspect was of, say, growing up being East Indian, we were actually the only family, very few families in the Fraser Valley and Dudney that were East Indian. There were some across the island, at Nacoman Island, but I didn't care for them because I used to say to my mom, they act like they're Gaudes, and meanwhile they were Uppernays. And so I was always very aware of people. And so when it came to being prejudiced, we never really had, other people might have, and I'm not just saying that just for the sake of saying it, we had older brothers, 5 brothers. So when we went to the school on the bus stop, we used to change the rules at the bus stop. Who was going to go, grades were first, or your age was first. And so we never had a problem. And so kids never picked on you because we had these 2 older brothers, and the girls just, of course, loved our brothers. And so that part of our life was really quite fine. It was only until I remember when I finished high school, and I was going to go to UBC, and I thought, no, I'll take these night school courses, and I went for a job. And the fellow said, I went to the unemployment office, and they had a job. And I said, oh, okay, working at a restaurant. So I went to the restaurant, and the fellow said it was across from the bay. And he said, oh, okay, so you could start picking up the dishes. And I looked at him, I says, what do you mean picking up the dishes? I said, no, that's not the job I'm going to do. He says, well, what job did they tell you? And I said, I'm going to be the cashier. He says, well, if you're going to be the cashier, what am I going to do? So I said, well, I'm sorry, because in our eyes, we were brought up, any job, a hairdressing job, any kind of manual labor, we just didn't do that. I mean, that's the way we were brought up. Our father was, we had money, and so we were brought up. Yes, we weren't afraid of work, but I wasn't going to do that kind of work. And so, it's just that was actually, I'd say, the first time I went back to the unemployment office, and they just wouldn't serve you. They would just have you sit there. One day, I thought, oh, there's something different here. And they would just look at you. Yes, okay. So I sat there one time from 9 o'clock in the morning till noon, and they never called me up. And I can honestly say that's when I thought, this is what they're prejudiced, and they're not calling me. So I just stood my ground. I went back the next day, and they looked at me like, oh, she's back. And then I was given a job and to go for an interview. And this interview, I'll remember, the man, all he wanted to know was about Sikh religion and everything. And I was getting annoyed, even though I was 18. I thought, what's he? And, well, no, why aren't you going to UBC? He said. I said, look, I want a job. Are you going to give me the job or not? And it was an office type job. No. So then I went, and I was another interview. Now, this next interview, the fellow that owned it was an insurance company. He was very involved with foreign students out at UBC, a Wakely Insurance Company. Anyways, just like that, within seconds, I walked in his office, he hired me right away, and it was my first job and learning all the ropes of working in an office, and it worked out. It was good, and then I went on I got married, and after my children were grown up, that's when I went to work for the Corporation of Delta, now known as the City of Delta, in the payroll department, and I worked there for 25 years, and I just retired about 5 years ago, so it's been good. Okay, one of the questions is here that our relationship with the First Nations. Now, I'm talking back in the 60s. When I attended school at Kitsilano High School, there was a girl that I knew. I sat behind me in class in about grade 10 she was, grade 10 or grade 11 it was, and she said to me one day out of the blue that she was First Nations, and I said, Oh, we had lived in Dudney, and there was a native school in Mission, and we visited once to play baseball. But other than that, we really had no interaction with them. And so once we came to Vancouver at school, this girl, and she wanted me to really look at her face. She says, "Look at my face. Look at my high cheekbones and whatever." And so I looked at her. I said, "Yeah, I can see it." And she says, and I said, "Well, why? How come you come to school here, not a reserve school?" She said, "Oh, my father didn't want us to be brought up going to school in the reserve, so that's why I'm coming to school." And then there was another girl, it was a foster girl living in a foster home, and she'd come down from the Haida Gwaii. Back then we called it the Queen Charlotte's. And so she was getting her education, and after grade 12, she told me she was going back, and I was bit puzzled. I thought there's so many opportunities here in the Lower Mainland, and I distinctly remember her saying to me, "No, I want to go back to where my people are, where they understand and where I will learn things." And you know, I think of that so much because as an East Indian person, a lot of times we get lumped in with, you know, they'll say Indo-Canadian. I don't find that term applies to me or us people that came at the beginning. I always refer to myself as an East Indian. And of the Sikh religion. And it's important to me for people to know that that's what I am. And because when it goes Indo-Canadian, now they don't want to say Indo-Canadian, they want to say South Asian. I said, you know what, they're jumping all over the place, and I stick to what I believe. And the only other person that I knew of Native, we were aware there was a Musqueam Indian band, and those people stayed to themselves in south of Vancouver and over in Capilano, and there's Dan George, who was very famous. And one of the chief of the Kitsilano area was called Chief Kitsilano, and one night he came to the showboat, and he stood, I'll never forget it. First we were laughing because, and when he stood, he had all the regalia with the feathers and everything, and the whole crowd, there was hundreds of people there. You could have heard a person drop a pin. We were just astounded. He stood up and he sang and he chanted, and they said, I'm pretty sure he was 100 years old. And it really, I was just in high school, and I always remembered that. But we never, it's only now that, you know, we interact with the natives, and they've done so many good things, and they've had a lot of hardships and a lot of things we've been made aware of, and it's really, I feel so badly for their children. Because when you're a child and they do things to you, it's very difficult, very difficult. So I think, being that we're immigrants, I think sometimes, you know, your parents, how to help one another, to be kind to one another, and not always look at all the faults and try and think, well, we can, even within our own community, not to be so judgmental that we don't know what that person's burden is, and to just to be there for them. Thank you.